Hey everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Clinic Gym Radio. I am your host, Dr. Josh Satterly, and it is my pleasure today to be joined by Brandon Senn. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing great, Josh. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Fantastic. Now, Brandon, you are over there at the, I don't know what you guys call it, the Mecca, the Beehive, the brain trust of Kabuki Strength.
Yep.
And you, what's your role over there?
I'm the vice president of athlete experience. So head up all of our education. I manage our coaching staff and perform many other functions across the business. My starting out here, not to be too exhaustive, but I was our first coaching hire back in 2015. I worked alongside Chris Duffin, who's a co-founder. We managed the client load of 10 people that we had at the time, and since then we've grown in many different reaching arms of the octopus that is Kabuki Strength, and now we work with over 200 athletes online, virtually, as well as people in person. We do seminars. Pre-COVID, we were planning on doing seminars in the UK, Canada, across the US. It changed a lot. We had to pivot quite a bit. But we perform many functions. Our business is very unique, too, in that we produce strength training equipment, coaching, education, and we train people in-house here. So it's a very dynamic business that I'm pretty proud to be a part of. That's awesome. And it's kind of one of those, how would I say it? One of those funny businesses where it's still so close to its core, right? Like basically everybody that works there is actively also a power lifter. It's not like you're so big that you're hiring the guy that's never lifted weights, right? Like no. Yeah. A lot of that, it's something that we've actually identified as kind of a barrier for us, because we tend to be pretty strength sports centric, that we have to actively kind of get out of that mindset frequently. Yeah. But, a lot of our coaches that we have on staff come up from a very diverse background. One of our coaches is a former collegiate wrestler. Another coach is a former very high-level MMA guy. Of course, we have just our coaches like myself who come from just a strength sports background, but we all have a pretty diverse skill set. Some coaches are a little bit more interested in nutrition. Some are a little bit more interested in rehab and movement. And so the collective of, our coaching staff, it works really, really well together because we have so many shared experiences, but we also have many experiences that aren't shared. And so it's kind of like, a situation where the rising tide raises all ships here at Kabuki Strength.
I just picture that your boardroom has to have an extra large conference table for the massive water jugs and massive amounts of Tupperware for every power lifter I've ever been around. You know, and then also room for a notebook or, laptop to take notes. But
it's really funny. If you were at our facility, you would see this, but we actually do have a gigantic boardroom, but we're still a pretty small company. So we like to go and just kind of spread out just because we can,
sure.
But,
you're also large humans. Like, let's not, you can be up shoulder to shoulder with a guy who's still going to be 4 feet away,
Yeah, no kidding.
That's awesome.
We got some big guys around here, that's for sure.
Well, I kind of want to dive into this idea. I mean, you guys are doing the I don't want to say online coaching, it's virtual coaching. So you are interacting like you and I are over Zoom or whatever. You're interacting with people across the globe, but I really want to kind of understand like how you guys got to that point successfully and what lessons you've learned, because it's one thing if somebody wants to run a marathon and you say, what's your experience? You say 0. Where do you want, how far out is your marathon? All right, you run 7 miles this week and back it off to 5 this week. And then it's 13 like it's just a numbers equation. I mean, there's not a lot of things, but powerlifting is so different. Powerlifting is not just about the weights and the reps and the sets, but it's also like, how'd that weight go up? How did you feel? Like, what are some of the lessons you've learned along that path that have helped you serve your clients at a higher level? Because, I mean, there are a lot of powerlifting programs people can buy. I mean, hell, I'm sure, when you go to those gyms, your buddy will hand you an old piece of paper with a program on it for free. Mm-hmm. So why the hell would I pay any money?
Yeah. And that's a great point. There's a lot of really good templates floating around, and they do serve a purpose. They can get people in the door. They can give people a little bit of structure. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be something that's going to be exactly for you. Now, if you're attentive as an athlete or as a coach, you can probably modify it a little bit. But what we do is completely different. We're a very high engagement, high touch coaching operation here. And we've learned a lot of things over the years that is quite unique to online coaching or virtual coaching or remote coaching, distance coaching, whatever you want to call it, that is different than what is traditional in-person coaching. Because I've done both. Our entire staff has had, they've all cut their teeth in the commercial setting for at least some part of their career, as many young trainers do. Some of our coaches come from the professional setting, even private sector, like the professional sports sector. But the one biggest difference between, online training and in-person training is you have to have really well-built systems to manage athletes and to be able to take in information and to actually frame kind of a story about progress, about the whys of things happening. You have to be much more attentive to systems and how programs are being laid out and considering travel and many other things. Whereas in-person training, you show up to the session, and I'm not discrediting anybody who works with people in person, but you have to train, 8 people a day, 6 days a week to really make a living at it. And there's no way you're spending, another 6 hours that day writing programs. Like sometimes you're working with a template, you're making it work on the fly, you're kind of a hype man, you're working around whatever that person feels that day. It's a much more in the moment type of an experience. And there's not often like a long-term development plan in place. And there's not, we're not always looking at sets, reps, intensity or velocity, things like that. Whereas with distance coaching, we don't have the luxury of like having that super frequent interpersonal connection with a person that we can say, hey, how'd that feel? Do you feel like you should go down in weight? Do you feel like you should go up? Whatever. We have to figure a lot of that out with the data that our athletes are supplying to us. And of course, we do still have those touches, but instead of it being, a daily thing, it's like a weekly thing. Like we'll check in once a week and we'll talk. And, we have a system for athletes checking in with us. We review information, we send it back out, and we do our best, similarly to how you and I are talking now, to connect with people. But we have to have well-built systems. We have to be able to demonstrate progress. And that's the key, because if somebody's not making progress, unless they just feel compelled to continue to work with you because they like you, that's not a really great place to be. Like, we want to demonstrate progress. We want to show people that, hey, you are making progress. It might not feel like it, but I can show you just based on data that you've logged, like, hey, here's a 5-pound PR. Here's a big thing. And you touched on this was, how do we kind of bring that coach's eye to a distance setting? And it's through tools. So one tool that we use quite heavily is velocity. Many of our athletes, and it's completely optional, but they have a velocity device that they hook up to a bar, and it tells them how fast that bar is moving. What that does for us is it replaces my eyeball that can be there with you. And in fact, it's quite a bit better. It doesn't tell you everything, but it's going to tell you how fast, and how fast is a linear equation based on load. And by knowing that, and by having a baseline, I can objectively say you're underperforming, you're overperforming, you're staying the same. Of course, fatigue is a real muddler of that equation. If somebody's tired, or even if they just don't try, that muddles it. But we have systems to work around that too. And some of that is just talking, conversing. But velocity is one tool that we'll use to be able to kind of interject ourselves in that setting. So practically, if the listeners or you have never used a velocity training device, we're going to go through and map a velocity profile of each lift that you want to track. And the most important is we're not going to do a barbell row or a dumbbell row, but we are going to do squats, presses, and deadlifts and variations of. And then by having that baseline chart that is simple linear regression in Excel, we can see per single percentage of load relative to your 1 rep max, how fast it should be moving. And because we know that velocity profiles, if you move your body consistently, they will be consistent for a long time. If you're someone who, maybe you cut a squat 3 inches high sometimes, maybe you dip one way, that will be reflected in the data. And it's actually very telling, because I can tell how good of a mover you are or consistently you are based on your scatter plot when you send it back to me. I don't even have to see your video. I can see, okay, wow, point here, point here, point here, point here. If it's not fitting the trend like I want it to be, then I go, yeah, maybe you're not the best candidate for velocity yet, or it just reinforces what we're going to be working on, and I can show it to you with data. So,
it's interesting. I have a friend who's a golf instructor, and he said a very specific thing. There's a similarity here. He used something called the Sam Putting Lab, where you put a ball and it lays let's just say a dime-sized disc on this computer screen. It shows the face of your putter and a dime-sized disc of where that one came off. And I mean, you're measuring like millimeters, right? And it affects the way the ball comes off. Yeah. And he said he just watches, and basically if they're just overlaying each other, he's like, okay, you're a legit player. Yeah. But if they're all over the face, if they're varying like 5 to 6 millimeters each way, much like your scatter plot, he's like, you just need to hit more putts. Like you just need more reps, like doesn't matter what you do. And until then, you're just paying for the world's most expensive lessons because you can't even control whatever I tell you to control. Sure. Like, you're just burning money. And, he says that's what keeps the golf game going. And I'm happy to take their money, but I'll just tell them, like, just roll more putts, man.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Golfers are a great example of that. Baseball players are similar. We had an opportunity to go up to a baseball training facility called Driveline Baseball up here in Seattle.
Tom Bodie and those guys?
Yeah. So we did a full, motion capture analysis studies on our barbells and our specialty bars that should be getting released, later in the year, that we can actually quantify, positional change based on different settings of our transformer bar, which is the variable position safety squat bar that we produce, as well as the Duffalo bar, Cadillac, all of those. Yeah. So, I don't think any form of sport tech is going to replace a good coach, but knowing how to use sport tech is going to make a good coach better. And it's going to make their life easier, because you're going to be able to get buy-in. Because I can just say, unfortunately, I think one of the best things you can say to a client is trust the process. One of the worst things you can say is trust the process, because it's like, just trust me, it'll probably work out. But if you can actually say, hey, here's what I'm basing my decision off of. Here's what I'm seeing. What do you think? And then we make a decision, and sport tech is a great way to do that, because a lot of it is completely objective, and it's really hard to argue objective data, such as is spit out with a velocity device. And we don't use that for everybody. Some people work really well off of RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. And, at the highest levels, for those of you who don't know me, I've worked with some of our best athletes over the years. I've written Chris's training program since 2016. So all through his 1,000-pound squats and deadlifts and, everything he's done, as well as many other accomplished athletes. At the highest level, sport tech and the implementation of it really comes down to like personality too. Like, should this person use velocity, or should they use, RPE or reps in reserve? For powerlifters, it really is more of a personality thing than anything.
And Brandon, just so my listeners can know, when you're talking about these velocity devices, like what's the price range of these things?
And this is why they've become a whole lot more popular recently, is because the barrier to entry has been a lot lower. Probably, 10, not even 10 years, maybe 15 years ago, to get into velocity-based training, you would have to have like a Tendo unit, and it would cost, $2,000, something like that. The next player in the game was Gymware, who's like the Cadillac of velocity devices. They're still going to be in that $2,000, $1,500 price range. They do have a lower price point item now that I think it's around $600, but you can get into velocity devices now for like as little as like $250. So it's, if you're going to buy here's the way that, because a lot of people think it's just like extra and, I'm not good enough yet to use it. Well, if you're going to spend money on a good barbell, like, let's spend money on like a good training tool. This is just like a barbell. Yeah. It's going to help you use a barbell better.
Again, going back to golf, like, early on, investing in a launch monitor and an okay set of clubs is better than custom fit PXG clubs and no launch. Like, they can be the best in the world, but you're not the best in the world. So, you need to kind of earn your way up that thing. And those dollars can go to a lot of other places to find a lot more of your potential faster.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're speaking right to me of that. I feel like it depends on who you ask too. If you ask the guy who fit me for my last driver, he'll say, yeah, it's you need this and this and that. But if you ask my father-in-law, he goes, it's the Indian, not the arrow. Well, I say, well, the sales guy told me differently. Just as a joke. I wouldn't say I'm an avid golfer. I shoot probably, if I'm trying, maybe low 80s. If I'm out with friends, I could easily crest 90 pretty easily. Yeah. But it's a very similar game for sure.
Nice. Yeah, it's a very exciting time. Like whether it's baseball, golf, powerlifting, they're even general athletics of like the progressions in HRV and all these tools that used to be out of touch. Like there's no way we could afford to put one in every gym, and now I think we're at the point. When I was in college, we had force plates and they were like $100,000 each. And then the installation was, we had a grant for another 100,000, and the amount of information we got with them was okay, but it wasn't anything spectacular. Now you can get like one of these pressure mats. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Body Track or Swing Catalyst and all these things that look at ground force reaction, specifically golf swing, baseball, things like that, like $2,500. And they're a doormat. I mean, you could carry one to another facility if you were testing an athlete and just go, hey, let me just see this, Yeah. So it's exciting as we get more and more of that. And then the software tools that are accompanying those are absolutely incredible. So you guys work with a lot of people all over the nation, globe, that are interested in pursuing some serious strength, right? For whatever reason. Maybe they want to compete. Maybe they just like what it does for them. A lot of different reasons. As you look at that, and if we have listeners who are looking at implementing a program for their patients, as you've developed this, and since it sounds like you're a guy that definitely tracks data, what have been like some of the hurdles that kind of you didn't expect? So, writing programs and doing the math and loads and everything is kind of, I would guess, what you expect on the surface. But what were the things you didn't expect as you were building this out? The things you kind of had to discover and support your clients in or find a solution to that you're like, wow, I never kind of expected that one.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. And there's a few things that come to mind there. Number one, my first passion in all of this was program development and writing training programs. Getting into like movement, and I use movement as like a very broad category. It was really a means to end for me for the programs to work better. But I was always a programs kind of guy. I was very interested in periodization and all that. And I would say the one thing that I found over time, because I used to really micromanage programs like down to, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of very strong athletes. Like I would be there, like it has to be this, or, you absolutely have to do this. It's just not the case. So I guess my, one thing is a hurdle that I had to personally overcome was like over planning. I think over planning is, I wouldn't even say it's better than like under planning, but it can be a real problem, because if you spend time, and a lot of young coaches really want to build the best program possible, because as soon as you have the program, just run the program and get the results. But it really does not work that way, unfortunately. We like to have kind of a map are we heading north, are we heading south, or west, what direction are we heading? But we're not going to go as granular as to tell you, turn right on Main Street just yet. We're going to have to navigate that as we flow. So I think along with that, though, you develop communication skills and you develop relationship building skills with individuals that would otherwise, your answer would be, hey, just follow the program. And it's your fault if it doesn't work because you didn't try hard enough, or maybe you didn't sleep well enough. Like, the program would work if you just recovered better, right? That's a real easy pitfall to dive into as a young coach, I think, who, plan 16 weeks in a row. Whereas now I rarely plan more than 4 weeks in advance. Usually it's 2. Oftentimes it's 1 week in advance, but I know like where I want to get to, but I'm not over planning anymore. So now decision-making's changed. I can now, provide, hey, here's my rationale for why we're doing something. And if I would prefer to have a conversation about it versus it being like a high-level dictatorship, like, hey, here's what I want to try. Here's why I want to try. Here's why I maybe think. So we'll have clients who, maybe the only thing they've ever read is like things from a very specific group of powerlifters or thinkers. We say, yeah, it doesn't quite fall in line with what we want to do. In those situations, instead of just saying, hey, it's our way or no way, it's like, hey, here's why we're going to make the decision we're going to make. What do you think? And then we'll make a decision together. Sometimes we might budge a little bit on their, what they want to do. But if they're really set in the sand, then we'll say, okay, let's try it. And then because we have systems and because we're tracking data properly, we're going to be able to circle back around and say, this happened maybe because of this reason, so let's make a better decision. So for me, a lot of the unknowns was around better communication from an online setting, getting away from just email communication as well. People get really rigid with email. And it was getting out of the box of not over planning. And I think those are two things that are very, very hard to overcome if you're a new coach and maybe you just learned about, block periodization, or you just learned about this, style of periodization that came from a book this thick and it was called super training. And it's what people talk about, but in reality, it's good in theory, but it doesn't work practically. And I think being able to overcome that and realize that, you don't have all of the answers is actually quite freeing as a coach, and allows you to make better decisions. Because I think the worst thing you can do is build a great plan that doesn't change based on decisions or based on new data. Like you're always going to have new data, whether it's injury, lifestyle factors, just even progress. It's so many things that is impossible to quantify. If the plan's not changing based with on new data, and you try to force people into that, kind of square hole, then it's just going to be bad for both sides. So I would say, long-witted wise, that would probably be the bigger things that I've overcome.
Yeah, it's you see a lot of rookie strength coaches sometimes program for human-like people. Being human-like meaning they don't have birthday parties, they don't have friends, they don't have social relationships, they never struggle with sleep, and they don't travel from school to work, like they never deal with traffic or picking up the dry cleaning or whatever, and it's like, well, when you mix all those things in, that's what your biggest enemy. It's not the plates at the gym, So,
yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So you learn those communication. By the way, have you ever read Nick Winkelman's book, The Language of Coaching?
I haven't, but I've heard great things about it.
Oh yeah, he super smart guy, and he was just we had him on the podcast, and basically it was all inspired by the fact of how come some cues work to make people faster or push harder or lift more weights, and some cues just seem to fall on their face. Mm-hmm. And it's funny how that little bit can change performance.
Yeah.
So as you've been working with people, what have you found? We talked about the hurdles, but what have you found is the main driver of performance compared to what you thought it was? I mean, you've probably run a lot of self-experiments of macronutrients, caloric intake, number of training sessions per week, amount of water, sleep hours, right? Like all these things. When you go out to that, and are most of your clients basically general pop people who kind of also want to compete? Is it mostly competitors? Is it,
surprisingly enough, as our client base was really small, and we had a really focused demographic, it was just people who wanted to compete. Now, in the past probably 3 years, we work with probably 60% non-competitive individuals who, and I just describe them, people will go, well, do you work with strength people, fitness people? I'm like, we just work with people who want to move their body better and be stronger. Like, it doesn't mean they need to set world records. Like, they're doing all kinds of stuff, but they just want to move their body better. They want to be more capable, and they want to be stronger. But we do also have our pretty, hardcore, like, just want to set PRs at all costs, individuals, and they have, their different needs for sure. But, the biggest, I think the question was like around biggest markers of like performance. I think the thing that I've come to realize, again, over the course of my lifetime as a coach now, since I've been doing this, is, more is not always going to be better. Adding 3% to the bar looks really good on a spreadsheet until you get into, week 5. So I think letting athletes adapt to the things that they're doing is actually a really good thing. Not necessarily always pushing for change of homeostasis, not always changing, moving to brand new novel stimuluses, like getting athletes to adapt and taking small steps is really important. And by small steps, I rarely will look at what is the heaviest load a person has used. I'll look at like what their PRs are and stuff at like, not even on a weekly basis, maybe a monthly basis. I want to know what your average loading is doing on a week-to-week basis. I don't care if you hit like one heavy set and the rest were 30% lighter. I want to know what the average is of those. And that's the best marker that I've found to gauge long-term progress. Is not like, did you hit a 50-pound PR? Did you hit a 5? Because say you hit a 20-pound PR, that is not necessarily indicative of a great training cycle, because you have to factor in everything that it took prior to that training cycle to build to the position to get there. So we look at the slower moving variables as the better indicators for long-term progress. Average load is a really good one. And we look at that relative to how hard was it actually. Because if load goes up and difficulty goes up, it's like, duh, like it was harder. But if load kind of slowly goes up over time and difficulty kind of remains the same, that's a way better place to be in than me. I would rather see the average load creep up 5% over the course of a few months in difficulty of it. And we use a subjective rating system to track difficulties. It is literally a 1 through 5 descriptive scale. But if I can say, hey, average load's got up to this, your difficulty really hasn't changed, that's a great spot to be. Whereas if I go, hey, let's load the bar up today and, put another 40 pounds on, like you might be able to do it. But if it was like the hardest thing of your life, that doesn't necessarily, where the question now is, where do we go from here? Like it was a great, kind of a, I guess, at the end of the day, this is why we do it though, to hit PRs. But myself and the rest of our staff is always kind of looking at the next step, because we know that, for you're not going to be satisfied with just the next 10 pounds or the 15 pounds. Like we want to look at what does the next 100 pounds look like? What does the next 50 pounds look like? And we certainly do not have a crystal ball to tell you how to get there. We have to navigate it along with you, but we need to look at some of the slower moving variables and get out of just trying to hit new PRs weekly. And that is not, the other side of that, and this probably plays to more of your interest too, is it's going to keep people healthier over time. If you can keep the train on the tracks longer, you're going to have more productive training for a longer period of time. And that in itself is going to equal PRs versus just, taking 2 weeks off or having to take, 5 sets off or, taking a month off because your knee's banged up. Let's get a year's worth of productive training and see where you're at versus going hard for 3 weeks and deloading. That's not the way to do it.
Yeah, it's funny. Two questions or two thoughts coming to my mind. The first, I've had this conversation with a college professor one time, and he asked the question to a statistics class. He said, here's the distribution of A's, B's, C's, and F's, or D's and F's in my class for the last 15 years. He said, let me ask you guys this theoretical question. How hard would I have to make the tests in my class to start seeing a dramatic change in the distribution of grades? He's like, 4%, the A's are still going to stay up all night. They're still going to study. They're still going to do that. The D's are still going to put in no effort. They're still going to show up, deliver crap. And he said that he had tried over the years some experiment, mostly in summer school. But he said, I've gone 10% higher and 10% easier. And he said, the grades really don't change that much. Yeah. Which is kind of an interesting thing. Like those diligent athletes you have, I wonder, they're diligent no matter what if you put a 3-hour-long workout on the paper or in the program, they're going to do it. And they're
probably more motivated to do it.
Right. And that perceived exertion or that perceived, how your 1 to 5 experience scale would probably stay relatively the same. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe vary a little bit, but until you start really buying into the fact that you're eroding, you'll see fatigue, 6 to 9 months of fatigue in a big way, right? It would crash in a hard way as well as your short-term things.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something. When it comes back to velocity-based training, if I see unless it's just a train wreck of a set and the person's all over the place and they're just barely surviving, if I see that velocity is below what I deem to be baseline or what I would expect, the first thing that we do is not say, okay, let's take some weight off and, do it again. We say, hey, try a little bit harder on this next set. Try hard. And they go, okay, 90% of the time, unless they're carrying a ton of fatigue, that's it. And they'll be able to put another 3% into the bar, another 4% in the bar.
Interesting.
Not a lot. And that's the great thing about objective data is you got to realize people experience hard training, but they don't train as hard as they can. That's a huge difference. And that's what separates the high achievers in especially strength sports from the people who are just good. Like, it's like the high achievers are going to try as hard as they can on every rep and every set.
Yeah.
And you will still make progress if you just put the work in and just show up and put your head down. You will make so much more progress, though, if you actually try. And it's such it's something that's really hard to understand, I think, unless you're looking at it through data. Because otherwise I say, I probably could have done one more rep, but it was still hard. And you're still probably to make progress from that. But if I can put another 2.5 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds on the bar for my sets of 5, for my sets of 6s or 2s over the course of 6 months, because I worked a little harder and I tried a little more, that's a huge amount of tonnage in that time. That is different than what you would have used if you just did the program, right? And it's a massive difference over time. It's not a big difference week to week, but if you look 6 months at the tonnage difference, which it's impossible to look at an athlete who hasn't tried, because that would have to be like, hey, just, kind of do this versus, it would be impossible to separate the two. But knowing the acute changes that I've observed in myself, our coaches, our athletes, like the tonnage difference year over year it's
compounding interest, right? Like, yeah, we're not talking about heroic gains. We're just talking about a little bit of gains consistently over amount of time. Yeah. And to your point, I remember, so Franco Colombo is a chiropractor. And I'm sure
really?
Arnold Schwarzenegger's training buddy. He actually went to my chiropractic college. Funny enough, in the final exam for my x-ray class, there's this tiny little humerus. It's like this long with the most gigantic bicep shadow on an x-ray, and it was fractured. And it's his. Everybody could tell it was his, even though it's supposed to be scrubbed. But it was just funny. Like, I'm like, something's wrong here. Like, you never see a bone that small with that much muscle on it. So he's like a 5'2", Italian dude. Anyway, so he spoke at our school one time. And his point, somebody asked him, like, why was Arnold so good in those years? And he said, you will never, ever in your life meet somebody that was that focused on what he was doing at the time he was doing it. He said, when we would do bicep curls, he's like, I train hard. Like, he said, no offense to anybody, I train harder than 99% of people on earth. Mm-hmm. And I didn't train anywhere near as hard as my training partner, Arnold. He said, when he's doing bicep curls, his entire brain is inside his bicep. That's all he's concentrating on. And he said, you cannot describe how intense that man's training is. Doing, you and him and I do 5 sets of 5 bicep curls is just totally different with that neurological drive. I don't know what you even call that, and
it's completely different. And it really too comes down to what are people motivated by. Like, it's funny, I would work with, working with Chris. I like to use Chris as an example because a lot of people know him, and, his lifting's very
done okay in the strength world. I mean,
he's done okay. Yeah,
he's all right. Let's get a future.
Okay. You can't just give him a program though and say, okay, just do, your sets of 3 and then get on to the next session. Like, the only thing that's even going to get him to get out there is if he's actually trying to do something he's never done before. Like, and that's every session. Everybody has an off day, right? And there's going to be some days where you just kind of get through it. But the overwhelming majority of those sessions is like, hey, every single rep is going to be as hard as I can, because I know if I can do that, then I can probably put another 5 pounds on today. And I know I only have 10 pounds for another PR. And that's the reward system. And it's the thing that makes them feel better about it. And, that is not taught to people. And, if you experience a little success, I think you can kind of unleash that a little bit, but you either have that or you don't. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people can't achieve huge things, but there's, a reason everyone can't be a Michael Jordan, right? Despite basketball being a hugely popular sport, there's only one of them, right? Maybe 2 with LeBron, depending on who you ask. You can't.
It's especially interesting to me with Chris Duffin, with Michael Jordan, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. There was no version of them before them. You know what I mean? Like, you can't, like Michael Jordan, there's never a player that prolific, that intense, that hard charging, which makes it even, you would think, harder to achieve that status. But in fact, history would tell me it's easier when you don't, LeBron got to watch Kobe and got to watch MJ and got to watch the Dream Team and all that, and yet produced what I don't know.
I was just realizing the corner that I kind of backed myself into there, because if Chris listens to this and he goes, so you think I'm the Michael Jordan of powerlifting, huh? I'm never going to hear the end of it.
That's true. You'll have to unfortunately work with this man in your future. So we better stop, get off his accolades. But hey, real quick, let me just do a live read for our software. We'll just take a little break, but I do have one question for you that I want you to noodle on as I do this little live read for our software. I was at a golf seminar one time because I love golf. And somebody was saying the most important thing you do as a coach with junior players is develop a passion for the game. Because if they have that, they'll stay up all night chipping balls in their backyard. They'll putt, on their carpet. It doesn't. They'll get better at golf. So if I were to ask you, of all the time you've spent learning how to train people in powerlifting, all the personal things you've done, and all the times you've seen Chris perform as well, we doesn't want to hear that. But what would you say is the number one factor that if you could give an athlete, if you could create this in an athlete, that's the game, set, match. What is that thing? So I'll whether it's their importance to recover, follow a program, stay diligent, whatever it is, whatever you think. So with that, let me just do my live read and we'll get back to this answer here. If you are interested in sending out awesome text messages to your clients, check out Clinic Gym Connect. So you can use Clinic Gym Connect in many ways, and it's all about communication, because communication is the engine that drives your practice, drives your gym. So if you want to send out a text message congratulating a client on their recent PR, you can do that. If you are hosting an event and you want to send a broadcast text message to thousands of people about an event you're hosting, it allows you to do that, and it allows you to do one-to-one communication, whether you want to check in with a patient who's hurting or you want them to be able to text you to see if there's any available appointments today. Clinic Gym Connect allows you to do all those things. So if you're interested in communicating through text messaging with all your patients, all your clients, then check out clinicgymconnect.com. Again, that's clinicgymconnect.com. Why text messaging? Well, I would argue that that's probably how you communicate with 99% of the people you care about in your life. So why not extend that to our patients and get the heck off of email? Email is, the inbox is just cluttered and it's a crappy way to communicate. So if we want to move into the 2020s, it's time to check out text message communication with your patients. The best way to do that, check out clinicgymconnect.com. All right. So Brandon, what's the number one factor you would love to see in your athletes?
Well, that it's such a hard thing to answer to, because in a lot of the strength athletes that we work with is really, there's many things that have to go into to make one really successful. I might even take this a slightly different direction. I would say, because I've been around a lot of really talented younger lifters who really do have the makeup to probably be one of the better lifters that have ever lifted ever. And I can kind of say that because the talent pool is still so small in this sport. Yeah. In a lot of these younger lifters, if I had my cream of the crop, I would probably have a high school kid whose parents supported him, who had a little bit of talent. Maybe he was a lineman that just wasn't quite good enough to play at the next level. That's a very, I got to have someone whose knees are probably the size of his head, I need gigantic bones. But with those individuals, the greatest pitfall that coaches fall into, because I've done it as a younger coach, is showering them in early success. Because these kids who are just freaks, it doesn't take much to make them stronger. Yeah. Like, we have kids who are 16, 17 years old who can squat 600 pounds. Like, it took me 10 years to do that. And it was a huge accomplishment. But you have these kids who, they're in their second year of training and they do it. And, you see coach on Instagram, they're like, look at, Johnny, he put 20 pounds on his squat, 17 years old, let's go. I'm like, dude, he's like a burning star. As soon as a little bit of hard training comes his way, and like as soon as it's not 10-pound, 20-pound PRs every week, like it's not, and you never hear from them again. And of course, maybe people get into it and they were only and the other side of it too is, sometimes people get into strength sports because they're just good at it, but it's a real grind. It's not a fun thing, to like, it's not, there's no like real reward system during like hard sets of 5. It's like, I just have to do this to get better. Like the reward system is like 12 weeks away. But for these talented young kids, like you almost kind of suppress that a little bit in favor of more consistent long-term training, and you leave a little on the table. And next week you take a little bit off, you take a little bit more. And then, when it's time to go to a meet, maybe instead of hitting hard singles going into it, you're only going to touch triples, and you're going to take at the meet what they could do for 2 reps. You're going to take it for 1, and you're going to underweight it a little bit, but you really want to instill like some consistency and some like, really, you don't want these kids to be so showered in praise and like you're the number one, and then all of a sudden like training gets hard, and like that's the time that they should rely on that coach the most. The coach has nothing to go on now because they were just showering. Now kid goes, hey, why isn't this working? They go, I don't know. And like, who knows? Maybe just having a bad day. Like, there's a real lesson with that.
I heard a baseball coach, a pretty high level baseball coach, he was a hitting coach in the bigs, and he was the head coach of a couple of university programs. And he, at a conference, said the worst thing that can happen to a baseball player is that he plays in the Little League World Series.
Yeah.
And he said that because he said, just look at the numbers. You see that's their peak. Like 99% of the kids, that's their peak. And usually the scrub that sat on the bench that never took a swing, maybe he goes on. But when you're at 13 and everybody's telling you how awesome you are, and you're like, oh yeah, we're beating our chest, he said none of those kids make it anywhere past that. He said They don't even play in college. I'm talking like junior college level. And there's a lot of junior college baseball teams that are decent, but he goes, those kids, that's the worst thing for him. He said, I would just get them out of that program totally. I was like,
yeah. And, and for these younger kids too, we got to kind of talk to the parents a little bit too, not in like a, hey, relax, but it's like, hey, we're really looking at the long-term, like every kid we have looks at their age division records. It's like, I really have to hit this before I turn 19. I'm like, dude, I promise you, nobody cares. I promise you, you won't care in a few years. Yeah. Like we gotta look at like what you, and number 2, I was talking with our coach who has a background in martial arts. I was like, if you had a really talented kid come through that martial arts school, he's not competing against kids his age. He's going against probably some older, maybe someone in their 20s who's a little bit less experienced. But, you really have to instill like a love for training in these kids. And it's not driven just by success. It's like very driven by the process and how it morphs you as a person and the things you have to do to get better, not just by early success. And it's something that, and it's so, I wouldn't say it's so obvious, because you do have to celebrate the things that are good about the program and the kid's success. But it's like, hey, I know you really wanted to take, a 400-pound deadlift. It would be the first time you ever did that, but we're going to load, 390 and you're going to crush it. And we're going to hit, 415 in the next competition. For example, there's always like it's really funny. It's like you almost have to hold these kids back more than you have to push them ahead. You have a lot of people have to push ahead and like kind of drag along, but there's some that you could be really fortunate to come across that you really have to draw back. And you're like, hey, that was a great set of 5. I actually want you to stay here and do that again and really crush your position. Or, hey, let's hit a velocity PR on this. And you have that in the tank, but let's save it for another day. And these are really things that you have to be really comfortable with yourself as a coach too. Not to say that I don't struggle with different things coaching, but you really need to be able to put, these more talented individuals on a path to do it over a long period of time, because if they really want to make it, it's going to take 10 years.
I'm impressed with you, Brandon, because at no point have I heard your ego come into play, but there are those coaches that want to be known to have the, U.S. deadlift record holder under the age 18, their ego gets caught up in that of they've maybe had some misses in their past and they want to nail this one, or they see it, and it's tough to put that aside and say, what's the long play here?
Yeah, and that's something that I've learned over time too. I think as a young coach, and it goes the same way. If I was fortunate to be associated with Chris early on, and I had an opportunity to work with strong athletes that if I was just doing it on my own, I wouldn't. And I learned very early on through even interacting with Chris and other athletes. It's like, if you want to take credit for the things that they are the best at, you better be ready to take credit when they crash. And that's a whole different ballgame, right? And I would prefer to do neither. Like, I'm going to be, a player in this, but like, this is your game. And like, I'm going to do my best to get you in the position that you need to be in. But at the end of the day too, like, this is you, like, you hold the keys to your domain here. I'm going to put you on a good program. I'm going to help you navigate it. I'm going to give you all of the things that I have to get you in that position, but I can't squat this for you. Like, I have to get you in a position to be self-sufficient. So I learned that because I had athletes who, really, struggled at times. I'm like, so did I do that? Like, who now who's, because if I say, oh, because of my great program, you did this. Well, because of my great program, did the adverse of that happen? Who knows? Right. Yeah. But that's why it's like, I think it's really important for coaches to check that, because it's like picking stocks, right? You can get a real winner and it's going to run, but you would be the richest person in the world if that happened every day. It's not going to happen every day.
Yeah. That's, and that, my friends, is hard to accept sometimes, but is what sets Warren Buffett apart. And that guy doesn't hit grand slams, but he just gets on base more than anybody in the history of the game, and it's worked, and it's tough to hold back human nature sometimes with that. But I guess the good news is that at this point in your coaching career, you've also been under the bar yourself, and every little desire to go crazy has been burned out by a heavy bar. It's that psychological therapy that weightlifting can be, or powerlifting can be.
No doubt about it.
Awesome. Well, Brandon, this has been an awesome conversation. I really think that I wish I had you around a campfire and a bottle of some decent bourbon, because I think you can go pretty deep into these ideas, and you seem to be very clear of thought, and I really enjoy this. For those who are listening to this going, man, that guy is the guy I want working with, and he sounds like he's trained his team amazingly. Where can people find more information about your coaching programs? Where can they find more information about these Velocity products or training programs? Can you give them a little bit of info on that?
So I am not as active on like social media and stuff as I used to be, so you're not going to see a whole lot of me there. But if you do want to follow me, it's just Brandon_Senn with 2 N's. But if you want to work with our team, you got to go to kabukistrength.com, search any of the things that we do coaching, search out our seminars. It is
actually, that's a good point. Like, I think you guys are known for the equipment and the coaching, but Kabuki is developing amazing education around the health and wellness as it interacts with these strength athletes. So for those listeners who are mostly chiropractors, physiotherapists, athletic trainers, check out their courses and their education, because don't sleep on that part of it.
Yeah. One of the best courses, we have quite a few practitioners come through them, as well as strength coaches and just, people who want to learn it for themselves. But I think one of the biggest benefits, and it's the same reason that I've been to all of the DNS courses that I can, as well as like a lot of our staff, having clinicians at our seminars helps them understand like how strength coaches look at movement and really how they can communicate with them the best. But our Principles of Loaded Movement courses essentially are top to bottom movement system. It's how we instruct barbell movement. And I just say barbell movement because it is not a powerlifting seminar. It's like barbell movement. It's putting you under load. It's working through every hierarchy of breathing and bracing and trunk stability, feet and lower limb and many, many things. So we'll be booking those, especially as the whole pandemic is kind of cooling down a little bit, hoping to get out this year and do those. But other than that, you can catch us on the Kabuki Virtual Coaching Instagram page. And I'm always available for an email or phone call. You can email me at brandon@kabukistrength.com if you have anything that I might be useful for.
Awesome. All right. Well, Brandon, I really appreciate your time today, and I hope everybody listening got some amazing points out of this. I know I certainly did. So on behalf of Brandon over at Kabuki Strength, this is Dr. Josh Satterly saying, go out there, maximize your license, and live the life you dream of. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks so much for checking out these videos. I hope they're useful. We'll cover things like rehab, exercise, business model, progressions, layout, everything else that helps you build a clinic. So if you're interested, you can click here, there, here, or anywhere to get more videos just like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon.